Those who face eternity easily forget what a lifetime means, what an ending means.
You know it doesn't have to be this way.
No, Kunavine, it does. They need me.
Welcome guys, End of Dragons Daily part 41. So I gave myself something of a weekend these past couple of days. I think we didn't do an episode for 3 days, and I've been inundated with messages from you guys freaking out, wondering if I'm okay or there's some kind of emergency. There really isn't. I'm doing perfectly fine. To be honest, I've spent most of my time spring cleaning at the moment and just didn't prioritize doing an End of Dragons Daily the past couple of days. We all march along. In fact, I don't even think I streamed the past 2 days either. So today we're going to be talking about the Warrior. Hopefully there'll be some related footage in the background, and this is kind of scary to me. We're definitely going to have to return to this topic many times, I guess. It depends how much space we've got, because, you know, elite specializations, I was kind of concerned about talking about an End of Dragons Daily. First of all, because I don't want to tread on the toes of elite speculation with boots too much, but also because these are such big topics. You know, I really do think that elite specializations sell these expansions, and they get people so amped up and so inspired, and everyone feels like they have something amazing that they can think of in their own mind. Everyone's got exciting prospects. So I asked you guys to build a Warrior or think about Warrior, give me some of your ideas, and it's ridiculous how many cool ideas and messages I've seen over the past few days. I'm gonna go with kind of a lazy attack for today, just as we ease into it, where I'll go for the things you guys thumbed up the most, and you know, I've curated a little bit, and we can hit some broad ideas of what the Warrior might end up being. First, Joshua says, Lindsay Murdoch was always one of my favorite devs. Her work on the inventory and bank management changes was one of the best unsung quality of life changes that led to Heart of Thorns being the clean experience we see and take for granted today. You know, I think a lot of people credit Lindsay with this kind of inventory style stuff, and that definitely does seem to have been a big part of her remit and what she did. But this one especially, I think a lot of people recognize her for, because there was so much communication on Reddit about it at the time. This was when the big Reddit AMAs after releases were in their prime, I think. Having to have your... Oh, wait, hold on. Was that Season 3? Maybe I'm mistaken. Having your keys in your actual inventory, many items being unstorable, and the structure of the material storage system really has helped keep the flow of the game smooth and immersive. And I couldn't agree more. Inventory management tends to push me out of RPGs. Guild Wars has slowly gotten much better with it. As for the Warrior, the most limiting point at the moment may be the weapon choices. The Warrior has every weapon unlocked and in both hands for everything except short bow, pistol, and caster weapons, staff, scepter, focus. It's super tropey, but I'd love to see a gung fu or ruby style gunslinger that uses a pistol. We could also see the staff utilized similar to a spear without having to bring aquatic weapons to land and holding different theming space to the Daredevil. We also could see a Dark Knight warrior that wields a focus, picking up corruptions and debuffing as a support character instead of an offensive or defensive archetype. As for actual mechanics, I think a more combo-styled warrior might be cool. Instead of spending adrenaline on bursts, you could spend a tier to augment your next strike, similar to Venom's but for more flashy and technical. Alternatively, it might be time that the warrior gets a mechanic that's distinct from adrenaline, at which point the sky's the limit. Alright, so you've canvassed like a million things here, really. First of all, I think you're very smart to talk about adrenaline. Most people with their ideas for a warrior, they're just talking about what weapon they might get, but you really do have to think about adrenaline. So much of what is existing with elite specializations and how they affect the core class is based around that mechanic, so you got to look at adrenaline for the warrior. And there's a lot of traits that already interact with adrenaline, so the idea of doing away with it wholesale, I can't see, personally. I still like the idea of a warrior that has deeper adrenaline, and yeah, obviously spends it in slightly different ways would be quite cool. I do want to talk about this idea of staff as well. I don't think that having a staff that you throw to sort of emulate spears is a good idea. I really don't. I don't think it... I hate saying this, especially about game dev, because we, the consumer, the foolish fans, we always think stuff is easy, right? And it never is. But it kind of feels possible, all right, to take all the existing spears and the idea of the spear and the fact that it already exists as loot in all these places and make it an above ground weapon. It feels, I don't want to say easy, but doable. Doable enough that they don't have to do a weird kind of semi-cop-out thing like you're proposing here. And I know that they've done that already in the past, like with the whole scythe thing. But scythe is a category of weapon that doesn't exist in any form. And again, the idea of when they started doing staff skins that look like scythes may have been a decision they made when they never thought they'd be that ambitious about elite specs in the first place. The idea of getting a scythe is a whole other story that maybe we can return to later. So anyway, back to the idea of warrior getting staff. Now, for what it's worth, I think they could get spear. That would make a lot of sense. I'll come back to that in a second. That's basically a paragon, and that works very well for Cantha. But the idea that they get staff, I think they can do that as a melee staff, not a caster staff. And it can still be distinct to the Daredevil. The Daredevil uses a melee staff, but does all these crazy flips and spins and evades and stuff. I can imagine something much more brutish and slow and precise and heavy hitting with a warrior with the staff in melee. Now, that kind of works to pull it apart from the Daredevil, but then you do have this kind of weird question where there are a lot of very delicate looking staves that already it's a bit of a push to imagine how the Daredevil's using them. Perhaps the devs don't like that idea. And then there is this idea of the caster weapons just being used as a caster thing. I wonder, guys, and I'll throw this to you in the comments, because I really don't know. It's up to ArenaNet on this. But is that a line in the sand? To have the warrior casting with its main weapon, to give it a scepter or a focus or both at once. I mean, Christ, don't forget that with the Spellbreaker they gave them 2 daggers, not just the one. If they were to do that, would it be okay to have the warrior start casting things, or does that make it too indistinct from the Guardian and from the Rev? Don't forget that it already kind of crosses the line in some places, like the Spellbreaker sort of is using spells with some of its stuff, particularly like you look at its elite, and you look at like the summoning of banners is kind of magical. I remember a few forum threads about this over the years. So what do we think? I mean, in terms of style and theme, should they finally get this? And then finally, I do want to point out this other idea with the dual wielding thing. Take Scepter. Well, a warrior, I think, could get main and offhand, and one of the things I'd like to see with End of Dragons, maybe we can talk about in an Elementalist video coming up, or any of the other classes, really, and I really do mean any of them, except maybe Engineer, is the idea of getting Scepter in the offhand. I really do think that's viable, and now think about that. Think about like a warrior that's dual-wielding those. In any case, some interesting ideas, and the dual-wielding pistol thing I think a lot of people have latched onto. Here was just one of many other comments, same idea. Mav S2P2 says, Buccaneer warrior with a dual-wield pistol. Now, this is something I really like. We touched on it earlier in End of Dragons. The idea that you could have pirates and nautical themes really heavy with the elite specs. I can see that, guys. I think you could have a pirate elite spec, and then I think that could sit alongside like a corsair and a buccaneer and a swashbuckler and a siren. There's like loads of watery-ish themed things, and obviously they don't have to go crazy and do it with all of them. But I think that this underlying theme could work well. You know, when you look at Path of Fire, they didn't perfectly match all the new elite specs to the environment, but they did often, at least through those in-game NPC representatives, have some kind of through line in the lore. You know, like the Mirage was using the crystal sands of the desert to make mirrors out of the glass for themselves and so on. You know, even when it felt like there wasn't much going on, they explained how these elite specializations operated there, and I think there's so much rich stuff they could pull into with Cantha, and especially like these watery ideas. So on that note, you could get a dual-wielding pistol warrior who's like a pirate, or you might just get him as like a street thug. You know, you might get him as like an Amphar guy. In fact, that might be better for thief, like an Amphar assassin might work as a thief kind of elite spec. And then that brings me to the Jade Warrior, the Jade Brotherhood, sorry, who are kind of these well-funded mafia-esque warrior brutes, you know, that were out on the streets. Well, now I like the idea of a Jade Brotherhood knight themed elite spec for the warrior. Honestly, there's so many ways they could go with the warrior here. As you'll see, another big branch from JM says, I've done a lot of speculating on the topic of the new specs. I'm glad we're getting here for warrior. Looking at what they've already gone for weapons, I feel like we're due a warrior monk. Looking through the concept art for factions for inspiration, I even came across some concept art of an Iron Fist, and he's linked to an image. A lot of the concept art around factions did go unused, but this is a cool piece, and I'll put it on screen for you guys. I know a lot of you will be alt-tabbed at the moment, listen to the podcast. You might want to look back over. So this is something they were thinking of years ago. They likely had this in mind as a Guild Wars 1 unarmed-based profession, given that warriors don't have access to pistols, short bows, and the entire array of spell-casting weapons. I figure they could pull a Revenant/Daredevil move again, and either give the warrior staves or foci, and give it a melee feel, perhaps alongside mantras, to really sell that East Asian martial artist archetype I feel we don't have in-game yet. My reasoning for this is thinking about how they tackle the adrenaline feature unique to the warrior. We already have a rage-based berserker and the anti-caster spellbreaker, so maybe the warrior monk would be the type to channel their rage or adrenaline, honing it to empower their utility skills rather than their weapon skills via a single burst, as there aren't many classes that have much interaction between their unique feature and their utilities, like elementalists with glyphs or NGs and toolbelt. However they do it, I feel like getting a warrior monk that focuses their rage through mantras, as the alternatives would likely just be pirate with pistols or samurai with a short bow. Samurai and short bow is a weird idea that could easily fall into another class's area of play. So obviously this is another message that goes all over the place. The main thing I want to hone in on is this idea of unarmed, and a lot of people talk about unarmed as the idea of giving people foci. So this, I think, is a brilliant idea. Smashing people in the head with a focus. There's so many focus skins that work well for it. And yeah, it's that Revenant uses a hammer in a really weird way. It uses it ranged. Daredevil uses a staff in a really weird way. It uses a melee. Well, maybe finally someone is going to get the focus in melee. And you can call that unarmed. But I'll actually do you one better. I like that idea, everyone. I really do. But I'll do you one better. I think that if they're pushing the boundaries a little bit more with this wave of elite specs, if we see the underwater stuff come on land for a couple of the classes, if we see them swap the handedness of a weapon, like the scepter going to offhand or the focus going to main hand, if we see these things, I don't think it's too hard to imagine that they might add just another whole new type of weapon, and that's like Knuckles, that's unarmed, if you will. And you would still, the question with this has always been, how do you deal with the items? Because you're going to want to equip some kind of ascended thing with a sigil in it and with a stat typing and so on to do things. Like, what are you doing? Just customizing your bare hand? Do people who choose this weapon path have less money to spend on their build and so on? The devs probably wouldn't want to break those rules. So what do you equip? And I think they could just give you an idea of Knuckles. You're equipping something that has an inventory icon, but they don't actually go to the effort of creating physical model for the Knuckles that will wrap around your hand. And I know some of you guys are going to cry foul, but the fact is that Guild Wars, as it is at this point, with how zoomed out we all hold our cameras, with the amount of auras and visual creep and bloat that's everywhere, even if they did spend the time on that, it is not something that I think most players would appreciate. And this is a good thing because it means that they can actually open the door. And so I actually see Knuckles as a potential way to get a whole new weapon in there with not too much effort. And really, this only comes if they're broadening their perspective, if they're being ambitious with this next wave of elite specs. And then that's what I would say the warrior monk could be. Yeah, I really believe in it. Some kind of martial artist frontliner that, you know, is really into bodybuilding and, you know, maybe even some wrestling style stuff in there. That would work very well. And then you're still free to have the focus on someone else. This also, by the way, does another thing. It allows the warrior to get 2 weapons again instead of just 1, thus solidifying their idea as the arms master. Another big concept here from Helios Legion, we have the Raging Warrior in the form of the Berserker, and we have the Mystic Warrior in the form of the Spellbreaker. I think the next one needs to be some kind of professional soldier, a War Master or a Commander. This is especially true if it's meant to be inspired by the Canthan armies and navies. Give them banners, commands, battle formations, or something that boosts the other players so they feel like an officer or a champion leading his troops. For a weapon, the ideal would be some form of polearm or spear. Otherwise, I could see scepters and focus taking a more military form as commanding baton, similar to how the Daredevil uses the staff. If it is finally pistols, then I would suggest taking inspiration in pistol-wielding cavalry formations like the Raiters? I don't know what this is. Somebody teach me about that in the comments. So, I do believe in this. I don't really know. There's this thing, right, where because people look at the East Asian influences, and maybe you look a little bit at the Guild Wars 1 Factions trailer and stuff, you kind of think that this is a nation all about big armies and these warring dynasties and so on. As far as the actual lore is concerned, I mean, hopefully you guys have followed the Empire Divided videos that I did. While a lot of that's kind of there, it's not really emphasized that much, I wouldn't say. I actually think there's a lot more guerrilla warfare and small-scale battle stuff going on in Cantha as we saw it in Guild Wars 1. That's not to say that they might not pursue these directions, that's fine. But what you just described here, I mean, I can't be the only one that sees this. You just described a paragon, man. A war master and a commander that, you know, support supports his allies. I mean, hell, command was one of the attribute lines of the Paragon. A heavy armor guy with kind of a yellowy kind of theme that throws a spear, which you just suggested. That's a Paragon. I really think Paragon fits extremely well into Warrior, supplements their existing ideas of having shouts and having banners, and now you just go a little bit further. You allow Adrenaline to interact with these kind of big supporty ideas. You might even look at the relatively recent shout rework on Warrior and buffs as something that might complement this new elite specialization. And even better, yes, the Paragon was added with Nightfall in Guild Wars 1, and we most often associate Paragons with Sun Spears and so on. But the Paragon is actually an awful lot like the Kurziks, who would sing and have their anthems echoing throughout the trees and so on. So some kind of Kurzik-oriented Paragon, I think, works very well. I think the devs might do well to give it a new name. I mean, they could return the name as well, but just a little bit of lore that explains how a Sun Spear went to live in the Echovaled Forest at some point over the past 250 years, you know, probably more around Guild Wars 1's time, and influenced those people, and you got like this whole breed and this idea of Paragons that are unique to Cantha. I think it really, really works in terms of the lore and everything that Warrior is missing at the moment, so this is probably my #1 thing that I would like to see. Yeah, the whole dual-wielding pistols idea is good as well, but I have one thing to say. Dual-wielding pistols, how exactly does Warrior use those? I actually think designing those 5 skills is a complete pain in the ass. Some kind of mass mid-range AoE probably does complement Warrior's kit to a certain degree. But then people are going to complain because it feels like the whole pistol bounce trait got lost from Thief and is now Warrior or something. So I don't know. Maybe we're just looking at another class for that one, guys. And lastly, keeping today's slightly shorter. I mean, we're still not as bite-sized as where we opened up. Kabansky says, I'm pretty sure they're going to go with that whole samurai-esque 7 Spears of Cantha idea for Warrior. So, yes, samurais. I mean, we did just get a pretty flashy-looking outfit plus weapons on the gem store. Are these in line with their vision for the Warrior? They might be. And the whole 7 Spears of Cantha, you got to remember that that was a hint, so to speak, in the Sunqua Peak fractal that we had recently. And the other thing you want to remember is the new Warrior Elite skill that got added to Guild Wars 1 less than a year ago. You cap a new Warrior Elite skill there, and it's the idea of having all these different stances. What's it called? 7 stances, Warrior? So maybe these things are connected, and the devs have been trickling us along and teasing us. You know, they did that a little bit during the Season 2 days. Not so much before POF, but could they be doing that now? And you know, the idea of the Guild Wars 1 Elite skill that basically bumps up all your weapon attributes so you can use any of them to extreme efficiency? If that is kind of a hint, because you capture that in Cantha, as to what they're going for. One idea I've always really liked for the Warrior as a weapon master. Now, this doesn't necessarily interact with Adrenaline, but maybe it would if you built it in the right way. I like the idea of getting a 3rd weapon slot. Like, legitimately, that you can actually have 3 weapon sets to cycle through, and now you can add an extra thing to complement your build somehow. Or maybe even more extreme than that, while in combat, you can sub on any warrior weapon you like at certain times. I don't know how the UI and stuff would work, but something like that that really emphasizes that idea that the warrior can pick up and wield whatever he likes. That's a cool mechanic, I think, that I'd be interested to see the devs do. But what kind of theme you'd pair with that? Maybe they'd go samurai or anything else is on the table, right? So there you have it, guys. A little bit on the warrior as we get back into the swing of things. Thanks so much for watching. Please, I do encourage you, thumb each other up, because in that way I can know that at least there's some popular sentiment behind the things that I'm going to be responding to. It helps out a lot. I hope you guys all had a great weekend as well, and I'll be back tomorrow for even more good End of Dragon stuff. Cheers, guys. Have a good one, and take care. I'll see you tomorrow.